My introduction to the story of Passover was not through religious instruction. Rather, it was delivered through the television, showing the 8th highest grossing film of all time. Still true, adjusted for inflation. Film buffs, and those of you of a certain age or better, likely had the same educational opportunity. The mention of Cecil B. DeMille's epic telling of the story of the liberation of the Jews from Egypt still brings images to mind immediately for me, although I confess they are all trumped by my recollection of Anne Baxter's smooth and low intonation of Moses. You just remembered it, right? Yep. While I see now that DeMille's film was replete with lily-white actors playing brown people, the images from the story it conveys were powerful. The religious and cultural importance of the story itself far exceeds that highly successful epic film. Let me give you a little scholarly background on the story of the liberation of the Israelites from Egypt. The story is found in Exodus, the second book of the Hebrew Bible. Exodus is one of the 5 books of the Hebrew Bible that are called the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These 5 books also make up the written Torah, the divine revelation to the Israelites that is the foundation of Jewish faith, practice, and the covenant with God. The book of Exodus tells us that during the flourishing of Egypt, Jews had migrated there to escape a famine in their own land. When leadership in Egypt changed, the previously peaceful coexistent turned sour. The new pharaoh was threatened by the increasing minority and enslaved that population. He also ordered the execution at birth of all male Hebrew children. In an attempt to save her son, one Hebrew woman placed her babe in a basket and floated him on the Nile, where he was then found by the Pharaoh's daughter and named Moses. Moses is raised by Egyptian royalty, but eventually leaves his adopted family as his objections to the treatment of the Hebrews escalates. He's called by God to free the slaves and deliver them to their new homeland and into a new relationship with God. Despite another change in Egyptian leadership, Moses' demands are effective only in increasing the tension between the ruling class and their enslaved population. Moses and his God ask for more, and Pharaoh responds with more work, impossible tasks for the Hebrew slaves. The standoff is ended by divine intervention in the shape of a series of 10 plagues: water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the killing of firstborn children. During each of the first 9 plagues, Pharaoh asks Moses to ask God to stop. He says, I'll let you go, just make it stop. But then refuses to release the Hebrews from bondage when the plague ceases. Before the final plague, Moses instructs the Hebrews to sacrifice a lamb and spread the blood of the lamb around their doorframes. The night that God kills firstborn children all over Egypt, the children of the Hebrews who have marked their doorways are spared. In his grief at the loss of his own son, Pharaoh relents and sends the Hebrews away. He, of course, changes his mind. And in fact, in the text it says, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. I struggle with that line. After the slaves have gone, and sends his military after them. Moses uses his staff to part the Red Sea, to allow the Hebrews to cross, And when the Egyptian military attempt to follow, they are engulfed by the crashing return of the water. This dramatic victory over the Egyptians is not the end of the Exodus story, but the triumph over Pharaoh, the breaking of the bonds of slavery, and the hasty emigration of the Hebrews is the focus of the celebration of Passover each year. The power of that liberation story is demonstrated by the number of African American spirituals that recount the story of the liberation of the Hebrews, a symbolic plea for God to step into 400 years of slave-based mercantilism and capitalism. The interesting thing about this story is that all historical and archaeological accounts outside of the Hebrew Bible offer absolutely no evidence that it actually occurred. Now, it was a long time ago. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but it maybe didn't happen. Folks have attempted to line the plagues up with natural phenomenon to no avail. Researchers have scanned ancient records for mentions of the liberation of the slaves by Pharaoh without result. In fact, there's no evidence that the Hebrews, Israelites, Jews in any large group were in Egypt at this time at all. Okay, so sermon done. No need for Passover, we're all done. Moving on. Yeah. No. Because the celebration of Passover is about more than the historical record. And the story of Passover is one that transcends Egypt and Moses and even Charlton Heston. That's a pretty bold claim for a Unitarian Universalist to make, that the story is more important than the facts. Before you call Fox News on me, let me explain. When I think about this story, after I finish reviewing the movie imagery that replays automatically, I think about its place of importance in the Jewish faith tradition. And then I ask myself what this story does, why it is needed. I also ask myself, as most seminarians ultimately do, what value this story holds for us today, regardless of our religious beliefs. Scholars believe that Exodus was written in the 6th century BCE, during the period of the Babylonian captivity, when many from the kingdom of Judah were held in the Babylonian capital after being defeated in war. This part's historical. Jews were forcibly removed from Judah and lost self-rule for many years. When the story of this captivity is told in the Bible and in other sources, it's often framed as the result of Jewish distance from their heritage, from God, that is then reconciled, which results in a reconciliation with God and deliverance from oppression, the same basic story of the Hebrews in Egypt. While the Hebrews may not have actually been enslaved in Egypt, the Babylonian captivity is supported by the historical record. It was real, and it had the impact of fragmenting the Jewish population, one of many contributors to the eventual diaspora, creating minority pockets in larger hostile majority territories. I try to put myself in that position. And putting my foot in that shoe is not easy. I carry a lot of privilege in our society, and it's been rare that I have felt like part of a fragmented minority in a hostile majority territory.
I'm going to make a $750,000 contribution to this church, and I want to talk to these people.
Well, we're actually in the middle of the service right now. Perhaps we can talk about that after service.
After you done, can I talk to them?
You and I can talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good to see you.
I grew up in Beverly Hills. I know about all the ghosts in this building. I'm gonna tell you about all the gold.
Not right now, though. Why don't you have a seat?
Okay.
You and I can talk after the service. Thanks.
$750,000 I'm gonna give to
You
this.
need to have a seat, sir.
Okay,
Appreciate your enthusiasm.
okay.
I carry a lot of privilege in this society,
Well,
and it's been rare that I have felt like part of a fragmented minority in hostile majority territory. My underpaid stint in corporate America aside. But I can try to imagine the difficulty that would bring. The loneliness, the gaslighting of having conversations with people who don't have any idea how it feels to be you. The sense that you are only being tolerated on a good day. I can imagine the value of a sign, a symbol that would let me know that I am not alone. Blood on the doorway showing me that I'm a part of something, that I do have community. Whispers of a plan and cracks in the orderliness of things that suggest to me that perhaps me and my people have not been chosen to suffer forever. That we are not abandoned. That things can change. I can even imagine taking some comfort in suffering, coming to someone else's home, someone with power, just this once, finally, if I were in that
this
position.
is all bullshit. I wanna tell you the truth. She's talking nice stuff, and I understand that.
Excuse me, sir.
But I got $750,000 that I wanna give to it and tell you people the truth.
Thank you.
I mean, I found the goddamn old ancient tree outside and we turned it to everybody. Who knew about that? I know about the grocer. I can tell them about the grocer. Why is the grocer here? Because of the limestone and when the limestone is absorbed,
It's hard to be sure.
It is hard to be sure. It's in
The story of Exodus tells us to draw together, to remember who we are, to claim our real identity, to live in the world as who we are. The blood on the doorway, a symbol not just of being chosen, but of continuing to be Hebrews, continuing to work toward a way of living that honors the truth of their faith, their connection to one another and to the land. Exodus asks them to take the risk of showing themselves in order to save themselves and one another. I imagine the first person to paint their doorway was pretty frightened. What does Moses know anyway? What if the Egyptians catch me? How will I explain myself? As the writer saved the story for all time, captive in Mesopotamia, separated from his home, he imagined the courage required to claim himself, to claim his people, to claim his right to live as a free person. And as that imaginary Hebrew painted his doorway, I see another person in a home just across the way who knows this is what they have been told to do, but is hesitating. I see that person watching, waiting, and finally gathering her own courage to claim her place amongst those who will save themselves and one another. This is a story not just of God intervening, which no matter whether or not we believe that ever happens, we can all certainly understand wanting it to be true. It's a story of a people choosing to rise up by being who they are. This story includes one of the most awful dangers we can imagine. Moses barely survived Pharaoh's mandate to kill Hebrew children. The Hebrew children only survived by claiming their heritage. The story seems fantastical in its violence, epic in its scope and drama, and it is tempting to dismiss it from where we sit. Ukraine tells us violence is not fantastical. And statistics tell us our children are in trouble. That the threat to the first or the last or the middleborn is very real for some families. I believe that the Israelites needed the story of Moses to unify disparate tribes, to bring order and hope to a people that were literally or figuratively lost in the desert for some time. I believe they needed it to bring hope to people who were often marginalized and oppressed. And I believe they needed it to remind themselves and others that while life on earth can be horrifically violent, there is hope in choosing and acting and believing. This is what I tell myself, that there is still hope. As I see laws, don't say gay laws, like those in Florida, now Alabama and Ohio. This is what I say to myself that there's always time to fight oppression, as I see Governor Abbott's order to investigate parents of trans children in Texas and the laws to prevent gender-affirming care in Arkansas, Arizona, and now Alabama. This is what I say to myself as I read the list of books being removed from library shelves in schools across the country, books that could help young LGBTQ folks know that they are not alone, that they are not abandoned. This Passover promise of liberation is what I think about as I read the rising numbers of teen suicides and how many of them are young people who don't believe that this society will ever simply let them be themselves. When faced with a bill about transgender participation in youth sports, Utah's governor vetoed that bill. When the legislature overrode his veto, Governor Cox took to the public airwaves on television, speaking directly to transgender youth on television and said, "Look, we care about you. We love you. It's going to be okay." It's not okay. I tell myself there's hope, and I see it in every pride flag hanging from house. I tell myself we can change things, even without divine intervention, through electoral politics, through learning more about ourselves and others, through helping those on the margins to claim their space with pronouns, with stories, with different names. I tell myself that it has always been people that make good in spite of evil, who learn to love, to act in the face of subjugation, who hold the hands and hearts of those who feel abandoned by us all. For me, this is the story of Passover. Our history says we need stories about liberation in the face of inequality and power because it's so hard to believe and it's so hard to understand. In the Passover Seder, participants taste the bitter herbs of oppression to remember to engage their empathy and solidify their commitment to justice. It is not just an act of remembering history, it is remembering commitment. They eat unleavened bread to remember that we cannot wait to choose to save one another. What can we do to remember to engage our own empathy, to solidify our commitment to justice, to remember that time is absolutely of the essence? We can make spaces where those who struggle in our society can relax, can recline, even for a moment. We can choose to believe that people experience oppression that we do not experience, even if the story sounds fantastical or biblically epic or just too mean to sit with. We can help them claim their identity even if we don't understand it. The story of Passover is not just about carrying the traditions forward to younger future generations. It is a call of duty to see oppression and act for justice, just as our principles call us to do. It is a time to remember that oppression has been overcome in the past and can be overcome again today. Passover is a time to be reminded that it will likely require sacrifice, action, a conscious, collective action. We can be the divine intervention that LGBTQ kids are likely praying for, even if they wouldn't call it a prayer. May our signs of belonging and welcome, our actions of justice and rightness, our invitations to safe and restful space for those who struggle, and our belief in all of humanity always prevail through the dark and sometimes deadly night. Please join us, rise in body or spirit, to sing hymn number 1.